Welcome to Just Off the Highway. I'm in the city of Springs on the far eastern edge of the Witwatersrand. It's a beautiful autumn Sunday, but you can't really tell that from the streets, which are basically standard issue for an industrial town. Now, interestingly, a while ago I received a message from Shane, who lives in Canada, but who grew up here in Springs. And he told me about an unexpected surprise hidden in the city. He sent me a photo of a magnificent old ornate fire station. The photo was taken by his great uncle, and he shared the fact that in the old town centre of Springs there's a major collection of Art Deco buildings, the second largest in the world. I was absolutely amazed. Once again, South Africa has a world-class attraction and most people don't know about it. It's like our publicity is being done by the Secret Service. But maybe because the people who live here aren't overly sentimental, that South Africa forgets that the story behind the growth of this place, Springs, is actually amazing. The area is first noted down as just a scrap of land between the boundaries of 3 farms. There's abundant water, so they name it the Springs. And then they find a good supply of coal in the late 1800s, and mining begins. And only a few years later, they discover payable gold too. And in the early 1900s, a town is declared. And the gold turns out to be the beginning of this huge reef. And by the 1930s, this little dorp is sitting slap bang on the richest deposit of gold in the whole world. And money floods in, helping the people of Springs to avoid the worst of the world economic depression and other local adversities, and they feel a sense of prosperity and progress, and they show this in future-looking identity, a world-class collection of architecture. Why architecture? Because buildings aren't only places of work. They reflect something about people, their character, their mood. It's as close as you can get to a statement of intent. Springs is young and confident and so rich that it shouts, "We're brave, we're going places. Keep up if you can." And in the 1930s, there's only one style that captures that kind of spirit: Art Deco. But what makes something Art Deco? Okay, so I've researched stuff like waterfall motifs and horizontal banding and geometric patterns and Egyptian influences. But I'll leave those explanations to someone a bit more knowledgeable, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Because for me, Art Deco is all about movement. You don't just walk in the front door of an Art Deco building, you climb on board. You almost want to strap yourself in, because even though they're standing still, these buildings look like they're doing 120. Let's start at Shane's fire station, or rather Spring Central Fire Station. In a car, you emerge from under a subway, and it's like you've gone through a portal into a slightly alternate retro future. My guide today is a modern custodian of that proud and passionate belief in Springs, Tony De Cruz.
The Springs Fire Station is well preserved and looked after because it was declared a national monument as an Art Deco sort of architectural piece. And obviously it's funded by the state, the maintenance and upkeep. And that's the reason that you see that it is sort of in a much better condition than all the privately owned buildings. But these are the type of things that one is challenged with preserving the Art Deco, and that is that the facades should not be contaminated visually in any way. And it's so hard. You'll see with the private buildings, it's satellite dishes, air conditioners, it's window changing without control, window frames being pulled out. And so there's a big move now to try and restore, say, the 10 best examples of it in Springs. The classic description of Art Deco, which I'm sure everyone has read up on, is the geometry of the architecture. You know, a lot of parallel lines, accentuated vertical lines, and then of course ostentatious, sort of trimmings and edgings and sort of extraordinary sort of detail in that. So in the 20s, obviously what happened is in the First World War, in 19 it ended. And then after that there was this huge exuberance of, renovation and Art Deco kicked in right there, straight after that. Effectively, Art Deco existed between the two wars. The first double-story building in Springs was built in about 1917. Up until then, they were all single floor. Then the first couple of Art Decos started right near the top here, as you can see, early, mid-20s. You see Windsor had vertical elements and horizontal, nothing too sort of extreme. You've got elements that are unnecessary but are there to just give expression. Springs Art Deco has a lot of vertical ribbing and ridging and spines. I find a lot of the buildings here have a central spine, very prominent, and then on that you've got this symmetrical sort of left and right, The fire station was built in 38, around the same time. So you can imagine at that time there's a lot of construction going. And everyone was trying to outdo each other. I mean, like we said, the balconies, totally sort of over the top, but absolutely exquisite art pieces, Architecturally sensitive buildings are very expensive to maintain. Art Deco especially, because the amount of work that needs to be done to maintain all these very fine details. Craftsmen today are not easy to come by. As you can see, Coalition is a beautiful example as well, built in 35. And then of course the Southern Life building is probably the tallest of all of them. And it's got the most exquisite two dual spines going up the center. Industrially, Springs was on a huge slope to growth because the industrial sector had just boomed because of the demand from the mines. With 12 shafts running simultaneously, there was a huge demand for engineering and industrial, provisions and manufacturing. So we had two big industrial areas that just sort of flourished overnight. So Renesta is probably the most famous one, Many architectural colleges and schools come around and study Renesta because of its sweeping curves. And as you can see, the balconies are really the highlight. Absolutely gorgeous. You have Carlo Court, absolutely exquisite, well maintained.
This one?
Yeah, Carlo, You see the balconies? Geometric. If you look at it from there, there's the ridge line down the middle, the symmetry left and right. So then you've got Josette and Mari. These two were built together. They were built the same one owner originally, and the belief was so strong in the economy of this place. You'll see they're very similar in design. They mirror each other almost. A few different elements, but generally built by one owner originally. And one was called Josette after the owner's wife. And I think the daughter's name was Mari. So he named them after his daughter and his wife. The Springs Hotel was on this corner, not that corner. The original was a real country, a Western style hotel with the upstairs balcony, the ladies in those dresses, and beautiful, very ornate Western style hotel. Many Springs sites, when they immigrated to Springs, they spent their first maybe 2, 3, 4 months in hotels. So we had a huge number of hotels. I think at one stage we had 17. And their sole purpose was to take in these new people that arrived and put them in a room. They'd go work on their minds, get settled, work maybe a probation. There's a lot of them weren't guaranteed they'd stay. And it was very much like the gold rush days. People arrived in town, but they needed a place to stay. So these little hotels, 2 floors, 40 rooms, that was pretty much the the magic number. They could manage them. Keeping in mind that Art Deco was only really sort of coined. The phrase was only coined in 1968. The Art Decorative convention in France was in 1925, and that's where the term Art Decorative in architecture was first used. But the buildings were built, they're not called Art Deco. They were never called that. And in 1968, a well-known architect at a conference, they decided to reevaluate the architectural periods, And then they decided that then the 1920 to 1940 period, and in this specific style, would be called Art Deco, and then eventually they took the S away, they just called it Art Deco.
So that's a partial intro to the Art Deco architecture of Springs. Still standing, proof positive that your boring old grandparents enjoyed some weird visual stimulation on the Highveld. And I'm willing to bet that most people who don't know Springs wouldn't expect this wonderfully eccentric character. You can see, the buildings are an important way of experiencing history in 3D. You can touch them, you can literally step into the past. They're like these silent but wise history teachers. They're incredibly fragile and they need to be protected, but real, living people live in them, and they need to be respected too. But these are not museums, they're homes and businesses filled with spirit. The stones have already been around for nearly 100 years, but unless this generation and their future generations can feel the purpose and hopefully gently adapt them to their needs, then the bricks and the cement just stands no chance. This architecture comes from the golden age of Hollywood, and it shocks us when we see our movie stars and our music heroes get old, because we have to admit that we're getting older too. We feel our own inevitable process of decay, and we want to stop the clock. But it also bothers us when we see celebrities pickled in chemicals with that nightmare of plastic surgery to try and capture fake youthfulness. Better to evolve, to stand tall, to be proud of our wrinkles and scars, and be useful. Springs always look to the future with confidence and optimism. Farming to coal to gold to industrials. The people are agile, the buildings are too. The next chapter of the story begins when we see them with a fresh eye, respect where they've come from, and embrace the journey ahead. There is no guarantee that the trip will make us rich, but it'll certainly provide a fortune's worth of good stories. I hope you'll join me for the drive. Cheers.